In this video, you will discover why I'm transforming the area behind me, which used to be the raspberries, into an experimental growing area. The overall reason is that in the States there's a lot of content produced about the Ruth Stout method of growing food. Now this is a no-dig method which involves hay as the only soil additive, and I've realised there isn't actually much based on a UK climate. In the UK, mulch is often and understandably frowned upon because it gives an area for slugs to hide and breed. So my objective for this project is to adapt the Ruth Stout method of growing food using hay as the only soil additive to a UK climate. And I think with a bit of tweaking and careful planning, this can be achieved to develop a very easy way of growing food with minimal effort. These beds were made out of scaffolding boards, which was a huge error. Because they're so thin, they only have a maximum lifespan of about 5 years before they break apart. So I'm ripping all these out and I'm replacing the others with a new material, but that will be in another video. However, I decided that with the top 3 raised beds, including 2 raspberry beds, there could be a different use for them. And after a bit of thinking, I decided that this would be a prime location to trial the Ruth Stout method of growing food. Dismantling the raised beds wasn't too hard, and as you can see, they were so rotten, and all it required to bring up the wood was just a bit of elbow grease. Unfortunately, after trialling many different varieties of raspberries, they never actually materialised into a productive enough crop for our liking. Now I'm not saying that they are a good buy forever, but I think that they might find a place somewhere else on the small holding, because in the vegetable garden we really want to try and focus on something productive. And the thing about raspberries is because they're a perennial, you can never plant something else in its place. And for what we got, it never really made sense to us to use 3 raised beds full of raspberries when we could be growing other things. I started off removing the raspberry canes using a fork, but I found that a pickaxe was a far more effective way of doing this. And I also used a pickaxe to take up some of the path as well in between, so I'm basically starting with a blank canvas. I also made sure I got rid of as many perennial weeds as possible, for example nettles, dock and also dandelion. How I plan to do this experiment is to trial a multitude of different vegetables over a period of about 3 years. And if you do live in a suburban area with a backyard, this means that hopefully the results that I get and any successes I can do, you can actually replicate exactly the same thing at your home. Ideally, I would have put down the hay last autumn to start breaking down and creating that compost layer beneath the mulch. However, because we're starting in spring, I've decided that even though we have a lot of soil, which I'm going to be raking out, I'm also going to put down a bit of manure or compost to give a bit of a boost and act as the hay which would have been rotted down into compost. But from there on, once the first layer of hay is all over, the only additive I'll be using is more hay. In a previous video on my channel about growing potatoes the lazy way, I did something very similar. I simply placed the potatoes on top of the soil or the compost and covered with hay. Now what I'm going to do this time is exactly the same with some of this area, but make sure I put a lot more hay on top, and also when it starts growing through the plants, I'll probably put hay over the top of that as well to act as the earthing up or hilling method. And of course I'm going to be trying other vegetables, and all of those will be revealed in later videos about this project. I don't want to dive in too deeply about the benefits of mulch, and you can see that on another video that I've done specifically about using grass in the vegetable garden. But what I really want to focus on is firstly that it's really good at retaining moisture. So if you live in a drier climate, for example Kent in southeast England, then it means that if you use a mulch you won't have to water as much, and sometimes you may have a hosepipe ban, and hopefully this means that your vegetable garden will see it through. Now I do understand completely about the slug problem, so that's going to be all part of the experiment about growing vegetables which might not have such an effect from slug damage. We'll look at using organic methods of slug control which are really easy to do and most importantly really effective. To stick to the goal of minimal effort gardening for this area, I need to follow these 5 rules. Firstly, hay will be the only soil amendment and mulch material for this area after I've done the initial setup. Secondly, I can only pull out weeds by hand. Thirdly is to never use a spade. The whole idea of no dig is to create a really workable material with your hands, and if there are potatoes buried underneath, then I'd only carefully harvest them using a fork. The fourth rule is that no watering is allowed. I'm going to put all my trust into the hay at retaining the moisture, and hopefully, fingers crossed, unless we have a drought which is almost non-existent in Wales, this will be okay. And the fifth rule, and I'm going to be very strict on this, is to make sure that I don't spend more than 30 minutes a week after setup on this 15 square metre area. And it'll be really interesting to see how I can cope with that, and maybe in a few months I might have to adapt it and add a bit more time, but I'm really keen to see what will happen. And of course I'm going to be buying a diary to make note of everything I do in this area, from sowing dates to how much produce I managed to harvest, as well as weeding or observation, slug damage, all of the things like that I'm going to record in one place, which I think will be really good to go back for a reference point for the coming seasons. I believe growing food should be a 50-50 split between having fun and producing a lot to eat. And it's going to be very interesting to see this experiment using only annual vegetables with the exception of tubers. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions or anything like that in the comments description about this experiment, because I'm really keen to hear your views on this. I think it will be really interesting to see how this project pans out over the coming months and years. And thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and my other videos, then please consider donating to the show to keep the content coming, and you can find out how to do that in the video description. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.